and this is my search for a material soul. Why think the Word is the beginning? Why did God say things like, "Let there be light," to make them so? The power of creativity and the power of words are connected. Through words, the mind forms and expresses its thoughts and desires. Words hold meaning. They are the shape of understanding and the means to convey intention. Words make the world. The relation between meaning and creation is one of the main issues that I want to talk about in this series, starting with how humans came to have the ability to create meaning in the world. This question is fundamental to the search for a material soul, and it's difficult to understand. Conceptually, it's hard to imagine how something like a mind could emerge from a physical, apparently random process like evolution. Emotionally, it's threatening to accept that the magical miracle of me is a biological beast on a continuum of creatures from chimpanzees to protozoa and beyond if we extend our connection to all living things. So here is a light to guide you on our journey. The process by which we became creatures capable of creating meaning can't diminish the beauty, exhilaration, and awe that our acts of imagination and interpretation inspire. We are truly magical in the way that all of nature is magical. No amount of botany can diminish the sweet smell of lilac on a spring day. And no amount of evolutionary psychology can diminish the breath-catching surprise of a Salvador Dali painting. We make the magic, and it is still magical, even when we know the trick. In the beginning was the Word. So far, so good. Now, what kind of word is the Word? Is it the kind with letters and phonemes that figures in a grammatical structure as part of a language? I've been pretty loose in discussing words. They express thoughts and desire, convey intention, world and word interact in the process of creation. Is the word that does all this literally a linguistic unit? Because language is integral to the way we think, we as adult humans, it's natural to conclude that language is essential to thinking altogether, that there's no way to think except thinking in a language. Since humans are the only creatures that have a communication structure that meets the criteria for a language, that is syntactic, compositional, and generative, it follows that only humans can think. Descartes held this view, believing that animals were just sophisticated machines without the capacity for thought or consciousness. A problem with saying that thought requires language is that you'll have a tough time explaining where language comes from. We'd be left with all sorts of beasts, from the fish in the sea to the birds in the air, none of which would be capable of any thought at all, since they have no language. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, enters language, and with it, thought, mathematics, and the whole rest of science and technology. Phew, that was a big day. No wonder God rested. One of the guiding principles in my search for a material soul is that everything should have a material explanation. The project is to see how much of spiritual experience and belief can be understood without invoking anything supernatural. I'm not claiming at the outset that nothing supernatural exists, just that I'd like to see to what extent we can do without it and still have a meaningful religious life. That means the human capacity for language must be explained, beginning with its proto-form of representation. It'll take a while to build up to language and the word. We need to start at the bottom. In this video, I'll talk about representation and how it could be based in physical causal processes. Later videos will take up the hard problems of consciousness, the self, and language, and how they can be explained in terms of representational processes. The word representation is used in a lot of ways, so it carries a fair amount of baggage. Try to drop all those associations and just think of items that have the function of standing for other items. As I'll be using the word, representation is a simple relation where one thing is about another thing. artistic representations, computational representations, neural representations, and other forms of representation are just fancy kinds of this basic aboutness relationship. For example, words like tiger stand for the thing they represent, the tiger. A picture of a tiger is another kind of tiger representation. Words and pictures are pretty fancy. In its most basic form, a representation of something in the environment triggers an appropriate response. For example, the honeybee dance is a representation of the location of nectar, because the function of the dance is to stand for that location. When other bees see the dance, they fly to that location. The honeybee dance is both pretty cool and pretty basic. It's amazing that these tiny creatures can code direction and vector into movements that can be interpreted by other bees. The anthropomorphic temptation is that their communication is symbolic, like Morse code or semaphore signaling. But symbols require a level of abstractness that the honeybee dance does not need or have. The dance evolved in a particular context in relation to a particular content. The context is the need to coordinate where the nectar is so they can get it, and the content is the location of the nectar. This tight relation of context and content binds the representation to a single meaning. In contrast, a semaphore signal of SOS depends on the symbolic structure of the code because the position of the flags is entirely arbitrary. Actually, it looks like there is sort of clockwise rotation of the right flag and then the left flag to coordinate flag position pretty tightly to the alphabet, but it could have been done differently. The bee dance can only mean one thing. The bees see the dance and fly to the location represented. Cool, but basic. It's helpful to think of representational types along a similar continuum as evolutionary taxonomies. The diagram shows how the phylogenetic tree branches over time as species adapt in different ways. Minds adapt over time too. Sensory systems like vision start out representing just one environmental feature like light and dark, and are tied to stereotypic responses like moving toward or away from that signal. Then the system develops to identify other features and respond in new ways. Likewise, the mind developed from very simple representational systems like the bee dance into the very clever human system capable of self-reflection, language, and even religious beliefs. Hardwired stimulus response patterns are the entering wedge of the mind. These patterns are so widespread in nature they extend beyond the phylogenetic tree in the diagram to include plants and fungus, even slime mold. There's a link to an article about that below. To understand how minds evolved from non-mental physical processes, it's important to think about the way natural selection uses basic cause and effect interactions to provide adaptive advantages. Our eyes and mind are fancier than a slime mold's, but we're descended from that sort of life form. At its most basic, remember that representations are items that are about other items, like a sensation that signals a light. The sensation is not the light, it's about the light. In my view, a mind is a representational system. Any system that represents is either a mind or the product of a mind, including the lowly slime mold. A lot more could be said about representations. If you're interested, you could start by watching the representation playlist for this channel. Things get complicated quickly, though. Feel free to ask questions in the comments, and I can explain more. I don't expect many people will want to do a deep dive into philosophy of mind. So for this series, I'll just try to give you a sense of how representations can explain what a mind is. I think that consciousness, self, and language can all be explained as more sophisticated types of representation. But I realize that this way of thinking about the mind is unfamiliar. Heck, thinking about a mind altogether is pretty strange. Hopefully you'll get more used to these concepts as we go on. In the beginning was the Word, a representation. God had a thought about something, light. The thought is not the light, it's about the light. It's the meaning of the light. When you're God, your creative power is such that when you think about something, that brings that thing into being. And it was good.